Welcome to our monthly webinar series. This is Jesse Carbanda, the Executive Director of the Hoosier Environmental Council. The three goals of our monthly webinar series are the following. Number one, to educate our supporters, partners, and the media. Two, to engage green-minded business leaders, economic development officials, and policymakers. And three, to dialogue with a diversity of stakeholders. The topic of our August webinar will be on business and economic development opportunities to reduce energy costs and green your building. One of our sponsors is, of course, the Hoosier Environmental Council. We were founded in 1983. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan, and statewide. We're an organization that's committed to advancing both the environment and the economy. We've had long-standing interest in working to advance clean energy policy solutions. You can stay with us in several different ways, through our website and our e-newsletter on our website at hecweb.org, through Facebook, Twitter, and through our comments box. Our second sponsor is the Indiana Association for Community Economic Development, founded in 1986 to serve and partner with the community economic development sector. And you can find out more about IACED through their website at the bottom of this slide. I'm pleased to introduce two speakers, Chris Wheeler, an attorney and a consultant to nonprofit organizations who works for the Transform Consulting Group, who's had more than 15 years of experience on utility and energy law, very passionate about energy efficiency and renewable energy policy, and serving as an energy advisor to the Hoosier Environmental Council. Transform's website can also be found on our slide here. Our second speaker, coming from the great state of Minnesota, is Jeremy Kalin. Jeremy is president and CEO of Eutectics Consulting and served as a representative in the Minnesota House of Representatives from 2007 to 2010, where he played an instrumental role in enacting a very innovative piece of clean energy financing legislation that we'll talk about during this presentation. Before I turn this over to Chris Wheeler, I want to mention a few logistical things. You can pose questions at any time through the dialog box on your right side of the screen. And we welcome broader questions about our webinar series or about HEC through Facebook, Twitter, or our comments email, comments@hecweb.org. After the conclusion of Chris's presentation and Jeremy's presentation, I'll read off the questions that are starting to come in for our presenters. Since we may have a number of questions, we may not get to all of your questions, but we will share Chris's contact details at the end, and feel free to stay in touch with her that way. With that, let me turn this over to Chris Wheeler.
Well, hello everyone. I know I have several friends and colleagues who are on the webinar today. Glad you could join us. Thanks for taking your lunch hour to join me today. On our agenda today are essentially four elements that go from more generalized information on energy basics and energy efficiency to more specific information as we go along on the financial impacts of energy costs on business, resources to help finance renewable and energy efficiency projects in Indiana, and a new concept for Indiana called PACE, or Property Assessed Clean Energy Financing. So we'll get into a lot more detail as we get towards the end of the presentation. So I hope that even if you already know a lot about energy efficiency and renewable energy, that you'll stay with me and you'll learn something new. Why we want to focus on energy use is pretty simple. Electricity bills can be a significant operational cost for business. Approximately 40% of U.S. energy consumption is credited to buildings, so that's a huge chunk. And between 2001 and 2010, the average retail price of electricity in Indiana rose by almost 50%. So getting into specifics about that on the next slide, we can see here, this is from the Regulatory Flexibility Report of the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission from 2012, that 5 and 10-year comparisons at the 1,000 kilowatt hour level show some significant increases. And, you know, I'm not here to badmouth the utilities. I used to work for a utility, but there is ever increasing demand for safe and reliable power, and that costs money. Just like milk, gas, and your child's college tuition are increasing, electricity rates are increasing as well, and I would anticipate that they will only continue to increase in the future and continue their role as a significant cost for business. This next slide is on where your energy goes. The point of this slide is to show you that 70% of your energy usage is for business and commercial buildings is for heating, lighting, and air conditioning. So because you're talking about a large cost for business, and the largest cost for business are in areas that can have significant impact with energy efficiency, I want to talk to you about how energy efficiency makes business sense. It adds to the bottom line to cut your electric bills, obviously. It takes the pressure off price increases for products and services. It increases competition. And we're going to talk more specifically towards the end. I've got some case studies where we can look at some real good examples, real world examples, with some hard numbers and data there that'll help drive this point home. I can also tell you that energy efficiency increases your net cash flow. Obviously, if you're reducing your electricity costs, you're going to increase your net cash flow for your business. You're looking at commercial price premiums for the purchase and rental of commercial space. It is a very good selling point if you're trying to get tenants in to show that you have energy efficient buildings. You have a more reliably maintained tenant environment and comfort. You increase indoor air quality. You have the potential of increased occupancy and property valuation. And every dollar you spend on energy efficiency saves up to $4 in lifetime energy expenditures. So you get a quick benefit, but you also get long-term benefits as well. I also want to talk about how electric generation is changing across the country. On the left-hand side, you'll see that this is really the way electric power production has existed in the United States and across the world for the last 100 or so years, where it's being produced by traditional utility generation. We're not there yet, but what we're looking at for tomorrow, for where we're going, is a more decentralized power production system, which is what this graphic shows. You've still got your traditional electric utility there, but you're also looking at solar photovoltaic power production, homes and businesses generating their own power through wind or through CHP, which is combined heat and power, which uses formerly wasted power sources like steam. You also have the potential for battery storage. So this is where I think we're going, and what we want to talk about today is how do we get there. The benefits of energy efficiency are also far-reaching. It's one of the reasons that I get really excited about energy efficiency and renewable energy, because I really feel like it's the perfect business solution for a lot of ways. And this graphic really gets into all of those different benefits from a health, employment, asset value, consumer, environmental, energy security, and economic competitiveness perspective. What I love about energy efficiency is that it doesn't require people to change the way they live, but at the same time it saves money, creates jobs, saves the environment. And again, for every $1 million of energy efficiency and renewable energy project spending, you have $2.5 million in total economic impact and permanent private sector jobs. So let's drill down a little bit further and talk about some examples of energy efficiency improvements in commercial buildings. You can have renewable energy systems like solar, photovoltaic, wind, geothermal, efficient heating and cooling systems, refrigeration, commercial appliances, improved windows, variable speed motors. You can upgrade existing lighting to high-performance fluorescent or LED technology. There are broad-scale multiple technology building upgrades like new mechanical systems and advanced lighting and temperature controls. There are whole building renovations, from lighting to HVAC to new elevators to caulking to almost anything you can imagine that affects the way a building runs. And you can weatherize and insulate the building envelope, from the basement to the walls to the windows and ductwork and air sealing. I really like this illustration from Johnson Controls because it gives you some ideas of how examples of energy efficiency improvements in commercial buildings can be far-reaching and touch every part of a building. You can have, in addition to traditional electric efficiency, you can have projects that affect gas and water efficiency as well. And these businesses that choose to do these efficiency improvements and renewable energy projects on site get to choose what's right for them. Even a small change can make a significant impact for business. Again, because as we saw before in the pie chart, 70% of lighting and heating and cooling are the largest parts of your costs. So, as in the illustration, things like advanced window film and day lighting and roof coatings and insulation, and efficient HVAC and chillers, and other improved insulation, lighting, and motion sensors can make a big difference. This pie chart shows that, I think a lot of people are aware, even if it's just tangentially, of what energy efficiency can do for them. But there are some barriers, and access to capital and the payback term on these kinds of investments are really the biggest barriers that we see. So how do we tackle these barriers? I want to get specific and give folks ideas on how we can do that. So in these examples, we're going to start off with an assumption that the business owner has the capital that's needed to invest, but they need an extra incentive to make the energy efficiency retrofits work for their business. I really want to encourage folks to talk to their utilities first, because their utilities have a vested interest in energy efficiency and renewable energy as well. And you might not think that, but even for them, every dollar in energy efficiency saves $3 in purchase power and energy generation costs. So this can be significant. They also have lots of rebates and incentives available to customers, and the utilities are also interested in finding out about local projects for purposes of planning, safety, and interconnection. These resources from IPL, Duke, Vectren, AEP, NIPSCO, IMPA, the municipals, and REMCs are available specifically to the customers of those utilities. So you need to go ahead and check out their websites to make sure that you can find out what is specifically available. I've also highlighted on this slide a picture of a local small generating project in Pike Township on the west side of Indianapolis. This business is called the Time Factory. It's a calendar publisher. IPL provided them a grant for a 125-foot 50 kW wind turbine that you can see right outside the office, which I thought was pretty neat. They used that as a showcase project at IPL. You can also see Carmel's first wind turbine at my former office at the Indiana Municipal Power Agency at 116th and College, if you're up that way. Another resource that's available is the statewide energy efficiency program, and I really like this program and I want to get the word out on it. And the benefits of this program can be layered on top of the utilities' individual programs, so you can get even more benefits. What happens with these programs is that businesses can do upgrades, including lighting, variable frequency drives, HVAC, and Energy Star commercial kitchen appliances, and receive rebates that range from a few dollars, for example, a few dollars for a lighting fixture, to many thousands of dollars depending on the project and the equipment used. The Energizing Indiana programs are funded by utility rates, so there are no separate fees to participate. So this is all gravy potential for businesses. So check out their website at energizingindiana.com. And this program is available to customers from Duke Energy, IPL, NIPSCO, Vectren, AEP, and IMPA. I also want to talk to you about green building incentives that are available to businesses in Indianapolis and Bloomington. In Indianapolis, there's a green building incentive for property owners and developers who are doing renovations and new construction. They can get 50% off their permit fees and additional rewards for integrating sustainable design. Check them out at indy.gov. As well as the city of Bloomington has sustainable development incentives for developers, not individual residents, but developers are able to get bonuses and allowances for buildings that meet certain sustainability goals, including energy and resource efficiency. So check them out at the address there. Finally, if your business is in NIPSCO's territory in northern Indiana, you'll want to know about their feed-in tariff. This is for renewable generation, small solar, wind, hydro, or biomass systems that are 5 kW or up to 5 megawatts. You sell the power back to NIPSCO. It's available to all NIPSCO's customers, and you receive a check for the amount of energy you generate in excess of that which is used at the location. There are some program details that are important to know about that I encourage you to learn about if you're interested, but you can see on the bottom of this slide that you can receive significant payments for the amount of energy generated depending on the size and the source of the energy, from 10 cents to 30 cents per kilowatt hour, which is, in my opinion, a pretty good rate. Net metering is something I also wanted to make sure folks were aware of. With net metering, what happens is that if you have a wind, solar, or new hydroelectric project at your business, you can receive an offset to your individual company's usage each month through a credit. This is not a check cutting opportunity, but rather a credit applied to your bill to offset the individual usage of your company. It supports generation projects up to 1 megawatt. There are, as with the feed-in tariff, details that you would need to be aware of that are established by the Utility Regulatory Commission. And as a customer, you're responsible for the interconnection fees and installation costs and maintenance. Also, I wanted to make sure everyone was aware that if you're talking about larger generating projects that attach to the 69 kV system, and for those who aren't familiar, a 69 kV system can serve an entire small town or a part of a large city. So we're talking a very large type system, if that's something you were interested in. That's a whole different process through the Midwest Independent Transmission System Operator, or if you're in certain other parts of Indiana through PJM. Just to make sure we've covered all the potential benefits and uncovered all the areas where there might be money laying around, I wanted to make sure everyone was aware of the renewable energy property tax exemption for solar, wind, hydropower, or geothermal resources, including geothermal heat pumps. They're exempt from property tax, and that includes the entire renewable energy system and all the interconnected wiring. The exemption is allowed every single year that the qualifying system functions. So this benefit could go on for quite some time, considering that solar panels have a useful life, sometimes up to 40 years. It certainly depends on the technology. Most of them are warranted for 25 years. You do have to fill out a form for the tax man and file it with your local county auditor. Some other resources for your business that come through some of our partners and collaborators that I wanted to make sure you're aware of is LISC, which is Local Initiative Support Corporation, which works with economically disadvantaged and distressed urban areas. They provide financial products and grants. Check out their website. Jesse already mentioned IACED at the beginning. They are interested in housing rehabilitation and real estate development, including industrial and small business companies in distressed areas. The Office of Energy Development has a great program called the Community Conservation Challenge. It will reopen, I believe, for grants from $25,000 to $150,000 in the fall of 2013. So keep an eye out on that. They're looking for new and exciting projects that they can fund and highlight. Also, the Department of Energy is a great educational resource. I will note that the availability of these and other programs and grants do vary over time, and you need to check the websites of these individual groups for more information. So now I want to get into a discussion. Those were all the resources that are available, as I mentioned, for businesses that already have capital available to them to finance energy efficiency and renewable energy projects. Now we're going to transition to what do you do as a business if you're interested in these projects, but you do not have the capital available. So you've got to get it to somewhere else, from somewhere else. What I'd like to talk about is property assessed clean energy financing, which is a process that's very similar if you're familiar with property assessments or special assessments that have existed for about 100 years in this country. They pay for infrastructure, roads, public improvements. The city or municipality or local government, county, sets up this type of land secured financing district or other legal mechanism. It's not a tax. It's completely voluntary, and the property owners sign up for this financing to finance energy efficiency and renewable energy improvements. There's no impact on business owners and communities that choose not to participate in PACE. And what we're talking about is a financing mechanism that is only available to commercial businesses at this time. It is not available to residential. Long story short on that would require some changes at the federal level related to Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and how residential mortgages are handled in this country. So there's some additional barriers to PACE for residential that don't exist for commercial customers. So that's why we're concentrating on businesses. What happens is these PACE programs are funded either through a bond from the municipality or under an open model, which is also a free market model. The businesses deal through the PACE program directly with lenders and get financing for projects that are specific to their businesses and have specific interest rates and loan terms for them. Then the property owner will pay the assessment through the property tax bill for up to 20 years, depending on the useful life of the property. Getting into some more detail on PACE with legislative history, as you'll see from this map, there are 30 states and the District of Columbia have some form of PACE legislation, which covers nearly 80% of the U.S. population. You'll see that Indiana is not one of those. We are surrounded by other states in the Midwest that have PACE programs, and you'll see here the years in which those PACE programs were established. I think we Hoosiers have a tendency not to be very impressed by what happens on the East and West Coast sometimes, but this map's point is also to show you that PACE is something that's happening in states that are red and blue, in states that are large and small. And the reason why it's happening in these other states is because it makes sense for business. And these programs, I will also note, are in various stages, from well-established programs that have been in existence and are widespread to programs that are still in the planning stages. So if you don't have capital to do an energy efficiency project or a renewable energy project, how do you get it? Well, currently in Indiana, you can get a traditional business bank loan. And I apologize for how wordy this slide is, but what I really wanted to focus on is how existing banking products in Indiana aren't meeting this need yet, and how PACE is more beneficial to business than what's currently out there in Indiana. What you'll see with PACE are lower interest rates. We're seeing them at about 4 to 6% with terms up to 20 years. Some terms are as low as 3. I've seen 5, 7, any combination. What you'll see with a bank loan is, admittedly that banking loan rates are prime plus 1 or 2% right now, but those are for very short terms, like 3 to 5 years. If you could even get a business loan for 20 years, and I'm not sure you could, you're looking at an interest rate potential that is much, much higher. In addition, PACE is available to all types of business, whereas a banking loan, if you have an existing mortgage on a commercial property, you're probably only going to be able to deal with your lender. There's not going to be any competition or negotiating leverage for the business owner. PACE is repaid on a tax bill and is not reflected on the balance sheet of the business. Obviously, a bank loan is going to have balance sheet liability. On PACE, the repayment of the obligation transfers to a new property owner, so you don't have to worry as a business owner about repaying your loan upon the sale of your property. Because it is a property assessment mechanism that's paid the same way property taxes are paid, it just transfers to the new owner of the business. PACE financing does not accelerate on default. So if a property owner becomes past due, only the past due amount is liable, not the entire loan balance. PACE does not require investment grade credit quality, and 100% of project costs can be financed. There are no upfront costs, and often you cannot get that with a traditional bank loan. PACE lowers the operating costs of a business and has a positive effect on the property value, whereas a business loan may encumber the property value. And PACE costs can be passed through tenants as an operating expense, because that's how property tax assessments are generally passed on to tenants, which with a bank loan, you may or may not be able to bundle that into the cost of what your tenants pay. In addition, PACE programs provide access to businesses to expert guidance and qualified energy efficiency contractors and pre-qualified lenders, and you don't get that kind of expertise with a traditional business loan. And what we're seeing is that traditional business loans really are not hitting this untapped market, which we think is probably in excess of $100 million nationwide, and we see PACE as meeting that need. What I want to talk about next is some specific case studies that I promised you. These examples, and we'll go through 3 of them, are from Ohio and Michigan, our neighbors. They are examples of large and small businesses and the various scales of projects that you could do with PACE. And this first one, it's a Frisch's Big Boy in Ann Arbor. I used to love to go there when I was a kid. And at this restaurant, they did a building control system, high efficiency heating and air conditioning, a lighting system overhaul, and Energy Star cooking equipment. They received PACE project funding of $91,000 over a 10-year payback term, fixed at 4.75%. And the annual utility costs were reduced by 19% at this building. The idea is that this reduction in energy costs will more than cover the PACE payments that are required to pay back the loan. So in this example, you've got a projected annual savings of $8,300 on project funding of $91,000. So the math's really good on this, and as you can see, the quote from the owner of this particular restaurant was very supportive of this. And the second one that I want to talk about is One Maritime Plaza in Toledo, Ohio. This is a very large scale project and a very large building from the 1980s. It's quite a behemoth and was quite the energy sucker. The improvements they did were top to bottom, a comprehensive retrofit, lighting, building controls, a cooling tower, mechanical systems, and making sure the building envelope was sealed. This project was $1 million over 15 years at a 4.35% fixed rates. And this was a really big impact. The annual utility costs are going to be reduced by almost half in this building. On the third case study, this is a small business called Little Learners Discovery Center in Berkey, Ohio. Again, a small project. They switched from fuel oil to high-efficiency propane boilers. The business was actually at risk of closing before they had this retrofit. Their project funding was $45,000, and their utility costs are reduced by more than 50%. And like I said, if you know anything about how much it costs to send your kids to daycare, it's a high overhead business, and they were able to stay open with this energy retrofit.
Thank you, Chris. And now I'm going to turn this over to Jeremy Kalin, coming to us from Minnesota. Jeremy?
Thanks so much, Jesse, and thanks so much, Chris, and to all of you online. I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to talk about what I've seen on the ground with property assessed clean energy. As Jesse mentioned, I served in the state legislature in 2007 and 2010 and was chief author of the property assessed clean energy legislation, among several other clean energy financing and clean energy policy provisions during my 4 years. I've also gotten to work some with legislators on both sides of the aisle in Indiana as part of a national effort in which I've had the pleasure of leading and playing a senior advising role now. Utexas Consulting is the name of the company that I own. We have a team of 4 and on staff, and then a whole bunch of advisors and partners. We have about 27 or 28 contractor partners and multiple, I think close to a dozen finance partners that are part of our network. The way that we view the world of clean energy improvements for businesses is the following. Financing and access to capital, as you saw in the earlier slide that Chris showed, is the one barrier to moving forward with sound business decisions on reducing your operating costs through reducing utility bills, or doing something positive for the environment, depending on your perspective. Almost all the time, we talk to business owners who are very interested in doing something, and if it can make good business sense, they'll do it. So what we have really worked to do is to articulate the business case entirely based on a business case, and present that argument and that perspective as a business owner to another business owner, and as a facilitator of financing to accountants and CFOs. What we found is that sometimes the paybacks are strong enough, or the credit of the business is strong enough, or other tools are available that bank loans, third-party equipment leasing, and other existing options are enough to tip a project, and we sometimes will recommend that as the premier option. Sometimes there's also rebates, tax credits, and publicly supported revolving loan funds or other resources, utility funds, items that Chris shared that are available in Indiana that can also take care of the need. But often we actually find that there's a missing gap there. Property assessed clean energy, because it runs with the land and is paid back through property taxes as a special assessment, like sidewalks, tree trimming, water and sewer improvements. Every year, I think hundreds of millions of dollars of special assessment financing is used in Indiana for existing community development tools. Because it is a known instrument and it runs with the land and runs with the property, it is a very secure way of financing deals. So what we have seen is businesses small and large, actually from Fortune 500 headquarters, doing a $2.2 million retrofit in a first-ring suburb in the city of Minneapolis, being really interested in using PACE as a means of very low cost of financing and very secure financing for them. As Chris mentioned, on the child care center, this is the other end of the business spectrum, a publicly traded company, but it was being able to see how they could make those improvements has been one factor in having them keep that headquarters here, which was really important. We've also seen from a crankshaft milling and repair company in northeast Minneapolis who really held on through 2008 and 2009 and has turned around. They really want to do solar to maximize their local generation, to increase a little bit of their business development, but really to save a lot of money. And so we've been able to use PACE we're working on one tiny little accounting issue just to work out with the accountant on a relationship with the utility, and hopefully this week we will get the sign off to proceed with the PACE application in the city of Minneapolis through the St. Paul Port Authority statewide program that we have built. We see everything from a small little bike shop to very, very large manufacturing facilities out in what we call greater Minnesota, outstate, away from the metro area. We just see this really broad range of doing so. So why would a business owner in Indiana want to see PACE? Well, there are a couple of things. Sometimes we see, as Chris talked about, the credit line of the business is such that they're just highly leveraged and don't want to take on something that is a traditional debt item on their balance sheet. Because it is a property tax obligation, we do believe that businesses should need to be disclosing all obligations on their balance sheets, but this can be treated as an off-balance sheet. But I think that's less important than the fact that it provides long-term financing, and particularly for solar PV and solar thermal and deeper building retrofits. It is really important to be able to find instruments that can reach out beyond traditional 4, 5, 6-year notes, and that can have, believe it or not, lower transaction costs than even an SBA loan or other bank financed or traditionally and conventionally financed instrument. PACE it makes sense because it provides lower cost of capital, extends the rate, or extends the term, and is secure. What we have found in Minnesota and in lots of other states is that most often at the sale of a commercial property, that special assessment does not get transferred to the new owner, but instead is paid off and capitalized into the mortgage of the buyer. I actually believe that's the best situation because conventional mortgages on real estate are still running at 2.5% to 4%, which is the cheapest capital. So if all the transaction costs are being borne and seeking a new mortgage, it makes sense to put everything inside that new bundle. But what it does do is it overcomes a very key hurdle I want to talk about for 60 seconds in commercial real estate. Commercial real estate is structured deliberately so that each individual building is almost always owned by its own LLC. So for instance, the building that I office in, Butler Square, downtown Minneapolis, the first LEED certified existing building in the country, is owned by Butler Properties LLC that LLC only owns this one building. But each LLC is often owned by a holding company or some corporate parent that might own 100, or in the case of real estate investment trusts, far more than that. Sometimes it's as few as 3 or 4 buildings. But the reason why it is set up that way is so that each individual building could declare bankruptcy and disappear or be foreclosed on and not touch the credit and the balance sheet of that parent company. The reason why this is really important in terms of PACE is the following. For anyone but the best credit, and if you have really good credit as a business, you can get financing for just about anything. But what we want to do is to make clean energy projects, zero down cash flow positive projects, mainstream investments. And the biggest barrier that we heard over and over and over as we worked with financiers is, but the building can go away, and how do we get repaid? And if we're just having to go get the solar panels and resell them, the solar panels, which requires more labor to install them, the equipment isn't worth what's left on the loan. We need more security. PACE answers that because it runs with the property, not with the individual owner. And it really overcomes that hurdle. I'm actually headed out in 3 weeks to a national conference for about a dozen of us who are, I guess it's a working meeting for a dozen of us who are administering or marketing PACE programs around the country. I actually think of PACE less of a program than just a financing tool, because it really should be just another special assessment financing tool like every other technology. But this year we are seeing hundreds of projects in the pipeline. I believe we are near 100 PACE projects having closed just in 2013 alone, and that's with very few full PACE financing platforms up and running. For instance, in Minnesota, we just last week got the final sign-off on our statewide program. I just see a ton of appetite for PACE financing as kind of the kingpin or the keystone that puts together the entire arch of the full ecosystem of financing options for business owners to put up rooftop solar, do deep energy retrofits, or even do such things as just moving to LED lighting for parking ramps with anywhere from a 1.5 to 4 year payback, and structure that over 5 years so that the savings exceeds the payments. I just think that while PACE is not the only option by any means, without PACE, I think that arch has a harder time standing up, and that PACE financing can really pull everything together to make sure that business owners have all the options that they deserve at very low risk and at very easy implementation costs.
Thanks very much, Jeremy, and we know how busy your time is, and we're grateful for you to lend your expertise from your on-the-ground work in Minnesota. Jeremy, just want to confirm you'll be able to stick around towards the end in the Q&A, is that right?
Yes, I think till about noon.
Okay, great.
Central Time.
Okay, very good, very good. All right, well, I'll turn this back over to Chris and say that we will try our best to accommodate all your questions. There have been a great number that have come in through our queue. Thanks, Chris. Thanks,
All
Jeremy.
right, and I will, thanks, Jesse. I'll try to wrap up very quickly here. I've put in some FAQs here, but I've already hit on several of these, so I won't repeat myself, but I will say that if you have a commercial mortgage, you would likely need lender consent for this, and it does affect the mortgage's lien status. And also wanted to emphasize the types of businesses and buildings that could potentially qualify for PACE programs. This is what or PACE financing, as Jeremy put it. Really, really broad. Commercial, retail, municipal, nonprofit, community organizations, schools, higher education, multifamily housing, agricultural and industrial buildings are all of all shapes and sizes. These are all ones that I have seen, and on the next page I want to talk about, just to give you some general idea of how the PACE financing process works. It starts with an initial application from businesses, and then there is an eligibility and technical review done, usually by a program administrator or a lender. You want to make sure that the energy efficiency projects and renewable energy projects are going to do what they say they're going to do, that they're using reliable technology that expects to have a useful life, that you can get the payback that you want, and that the economics that look like they're going to work on paper are really going to work. So that's what that review is for. You also have the point at which, as I mentioned just a moment ago, your mortgage lender becomes involved, if there is one. And then there's financing and services agreements, lots of paperwork to get signed. And then you have a final approval and release of funds, as well as once the projects are complete. A lot of these programs have what's called EM&V, which is evaluation, measurement, and verification. So you're making sure that the project that we said was going to happen on paper actually got installed with what they said it was going to get installed for, and it's operating the way it's supposed to and bringing the benefits. So that's just another check and balance for these programs to make sure that no one gets taken advantage of by any unsavory contractor or vendor or lender. So, and these last few slides are in closing, just really emphasizing the advantages to all and the advantages to building owners. One of the things that I think is most important about these programs, and I'll let Jesse go through these next few slides just as I talk, is the fact that, again, there is no government mandate. I think we're dealing with plenty of government mandates these days. We're not big fans of them in Indiana. We like home rule, we like control, we like things that favor business and the environment at the same time. And I think that's what we're talking about. I really hope that you learned something today. We want you to help us. If you think PACE makes sense in Indiana and it bridges the gap that Jeremy was talking about, we're going to need your help to make PACE a reality in Indiana during the next legislative session. We've had a couple PACE bills in Indiana in the past that have not gotten all the way through the legislature. So we encourage you to speak with, call, especially email your legislator if you're interested. There's plenty of ways to get involved in the legislative process. If you don't know who your legislators are, I've got a website here where you can look up what district you're in based on your address. And I really encourage you to let other business owners know about PACE financing as well. We're going to be doing several more workshops, some live and probably another webinar as well. So I encourage you on this last page will be a continuing resource to you. We have a new website that's up called paceindiana.org. We're going to have additional case studies there and information on how you can take action and information on further workshops that are going to occur. There's also my contact information there. In the event that we're getting ready to do a Q&A. In the event that we're not able to get to your question, or I don't answer your question fully, feel free to contact me directly at the email address there, kwheeler@hecweb.org.
Thank you, Chris. And like Chris said, we're going to wrap up our webinar here with trying to field as many of your questions as possible. As I mentioned before, we have a great number of folks that have posed these to us, and so we're going to do our best to answer them. I'm taking them in no particular order. John posed the question, is there anything like PACE available for homeowners?
There are residential programs in other states. They are structured differently than what we're talking about today, but they're out there. But they vary from state to state. So it's a little hard to get into specifics, but generally they tend to be state-run programs that are funded a bit differently, usually with grants or some other entity similar to Energizing Indiana. That's a statewide energy efficiency organization.
Thanks, Chris. This question.
Go
ahead, Jeremy.
John, there are a couple of points to raise here. One point quickly is there is for energy efficiency loans for residences. There's a Citibank or the Citi Group just partnered with the state of California on an interesting endeavor that I think the state of Indiana would be wise to monitor, called WHEEL, W-H-E-E-L, Warehouse for Home Energy Efficiency Loans. And I believe it's $25 million. But basically they've set up a process for underwriting affordable residential loans and providing enough credit enhancement through things other than the senior lien on property taxes that PACE offers. The reason why PACE is currently not available for the vast majority of residences, of single-family residences, is, as Chris described, the existing mortgage holder has to, in Minnesota, and I believe that it's a very similar structure in Indiana, the existing mortgage holder has to acknowledge that they know that senior lien is being placed on their property taxes, the special assessments being placed there, and that it does not default the mortgage because the vast majority of residential mortgages are underwritten by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac, and in response, I think still a wrong response, but in response to the 2008 mortgage collapse, they have said that the risk is too high. They don't fully understand the PACE lien and need a lot more data. So for now, they will not allow any mortgage that's secured by them to allow the PACE lien above them. In the commercial space, we have not found any project where securing that acknowledgement has been an issue. But for residential, it's not available. That's
Another question that was posed is, how does a lien order affect the interest rate for PACE loans? Would you discuss in general the placement or order of the lien and its impact on the interest rate the municipal government can get for the bond?
Well,
sure.
yeah, go ahead, Jeremy.
So we're seeing interest rates actually even lower than even what you may have seen, Chris, in Connecticut. I believe in Minnesota, we were the first in the country. Eutectics was to bring community banks in as purchasers of those bonds. As a result, Connecticut was able to build and point to what we did, and they qualified a community bank bond purchaser at 1.9%, which is amazing, but because it is such a secure loan, and they understood that they will get repaid for it. If you move from a lien above the mortgage as a basic special assessment, as special assessments are located because of the property tax structure, and come in basically in effect a second mortgage, you end up adding even more than a couple hundred basis points as you do moving from a first mortgage to a second. We're seeing that those bonds are actually largely unmarketable, or they're being bought by private equity and higher risk funds in the low double digits, which basically makes them unmarketable loans to individual consumers. So having a secondary lien, I have yet to see any program or any bond that can be marketed at less than double digits, and certainly no loan is going to be, it's a very, very tough to swallow a 10 or 12% loan for something like a solar system or a deep retrofit.
The next question is, one of the historically challenging areas for energy efficiency is with multi-dwelling rental units. Can this be used as an incentivizer there? Other thoughts on how to reach this market?
Jeremy, I've seen multi-dwelling units in other states defined as 5 or more residents within the multi-unit dwelling in order to qualify. Have you done any multi-unit projects?
We have not, and just because of the structure of our new statewide PACE program in Minnesota through the St. Paul Port Authority, any housing is not going to be eligible in our state. The biggest factor is in figuring out how to allocate costs, to tenants and who pays the bill. We could be speaking for another 6 hours on the challenges in the multifamily asset class. It is one that I think is going to continue to require a lot of foundation and public support and grant dollars in order to continue to develop the research. There may be some significant efforts coming out of a couple of DOE projects, study projects in the next few years that I think that may end up getting to scale and make it worth drilling much deeper into that asset class. But for now, basically, if the building owner has good credit, there are all sorts of housing agencies that can put together conventional loans. On PACE, it just becomes much more difficult because you start getting into issues of vacancy and cash flow and uncertainty about rent rolls, et cetera.
Is PACE available for sewer connections in any jurisdictions?
I have not seen it.
Jeremy?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question, Jesse?
Jeremy, Sarah asked, is PACE available for sewer connections in any jurisdictions?
So interestingly, in Minnesota, what we did with PACE is actually just added energy to the list of 11 or 12 existing authorized technologies for special assessment financing for private properties. Sewer connections and wastewater improvements and roads and everything else, very similar development costs, are all currently allowed in Minnesota. I believe that they are currently allowed in Indiana because it is such a common practice in every state that I've talked to. So it would not be called PACE, but it's just known as special assessment financing. I'm not an expert in Indiana law, but I believe that's the case.
I think you're right.
Jeremy, Laura posed the question, what in your opinion is better to finance solar photovoltaic, a properly structured feed-in tariff or a PACE loan?
So they're actually, it's not an either or. So the feed-in tariff, basically there are two variables. One is the cost of the system. So let's talk about a project, a typical project that we're seeing in Minnesota, which is 40 kilowatts at $3 a watt. We've really probably been able to drive down that cost substantially. So it might cost $120,000, and after a tax credit, it leaves about $72,000 to be financed. The other side of it is where does the money come from? What's the value of that solar production, of that solar energy every year? And so right now our systems are typically, of the systems of our partners, typically monetized at about $500 a month or $6,000 a year. It obviously depends on the rate of the value. That's about 8 cents a kilowatt hour, I believe. What feed-in tariffs do, excuse me, there's no way for me to actually mute that ringers, so it'll just be in the background. But what feed-in tariffs do is just increase the value of that revenue every year. So it might jump from $6,000 to, let's say, $8,000 or $10,000. So if you have $72,000 that's left to be financed, you spread it out over 10 years with interest costs, it might be $8,000, and the solar is worth $10,000 on a 10-year basis. That would be cash flow positive. What we try to do is stretch it out. We can actually now go out to 20 years and just make it work. So feed-in tariffs can increase the value of the solar production, but you still are left with the upfront cost of how to pay for it, and that's what PACE addresses.
Thank you, Jeremy. Some logistical questions that folks have asked. Will we get copies of the presentation? Yes, we will have the presentation posted on paceindiana.org. Kim had posed the question, why has Indiana not passed PACE legislation? What are the arguments against it?
The arguments that we've seen against it have mainly come from the banking industry. I think we need to educate them more about how it works. Their major fear is the senior lien status that makes PACE financing work for business and gives you the low interest rates is something that frightens banks because they don't understand that the impact to them is minimal, and that the benefits that they can draw from tapping into this new financing product in this untapped market far, in my opinion, far outweighs any risk to banks that comes from the lien status.
Pete has asked a question about combined heat and power and other industrial energy efficiency incentives, and if there's any insight, I guess this is a question for you, Chris, that you can provide about how existing incentives in Indiana could possibly benefit the industrial side. And if that's something you'd like to follow up with Pete on offline.
Yeah, I might want to do that. I think there are real benefits to the industrial side, and I'm not sure how well known they are by the industrial sector, but Pete or anybody else who's interested in talking to me about that offline, I'm happy to do it.
Okay, well, we're going to try to honor being sensitive and considerate of your time, so it's just a couple of minutes past 1. We're going to sign off here, but I encourage you again to contact Chris with more of your questions at kwheeler@hecweb.org. You can offer general comments about HEC at comments@hecweb.org. We apologize for the first few minutes of technical difficulties there, and feel free to offer suggestions about how we can be better at addressing any concerns you might have on either the technical, sound, or slide side via that email address, comments@hecweb.org. We are also very open to hearing your thoughts about other topics to cover for future webinars. Once again, both the presentation and this recording will be available at paceindiana.org. And once again, we're grateful for your time and appreciate the insights of Jeremy Kalin from Minnesota and Chris Wheeler here in Indianapolis. Thanks again, everyone, and have a wonderful and safe Labor Day weekend.